Compare and contrast fractions. Your learning target today is I can use models to compare two fractions, and you'll know you're successful when you can see how fractions are the same, bigger, or smaller than each other. Today we are going to be working with comparing fractions and noticing how to compare them, which is how they are similar, and then how they're different, contrasting them too. So by comparing and contrasting fractions, I'm going to use this tool that I'm also going to have in Google Classroom or as a handout for you, and you can use this anytime we are working with fractions. So when I'm comparing fractions and I'm trying to see how they're the same, notice how each of these rectangles are separated equally. But this one is cut in halves, right? That means it's cut exactly in half. So if like that was a breadstick, I would get one half, right? And then you would get the other half. The same thing for the rest of the fractions, right? Well, this time this is in thirds instead of in halves, right? So that means I can have one, I can give one to a friend, and I can give one to another friend. So it's just like that. Say we have fourths. This time it's cut in 4 pieces. So that keeps continuing because when I have the same rectangle or the same breadstick, if I think of it that way, it's the same size, but when we cut it differently, that means I have to share it a little differently. And then, of course, each piece gets smaller the more pieces I cut it into. Notice how I have fifths this time, where I have 1/5 is each little piece. Notice how that was the same breadstick, but I would have a lot smaller piece if I shared it with 5 people versus if I only shared it with one other person, right? 2 people total. I'd have a lot bigger piece. So the more pieces I have to cut, that means the smaller my fraction will be. Notice how my denominator is bigger, but my piece is smaller. So the bigger the denominator, the smaller the piece, right? Like down here, our denominator is 12. Look how small those pieces are. If I were to do that with the whole thing, that is very small compared to when my denominator is really small, like a 2. Look how big my piece is. So something else I want you to notice when we are comparing and contrasting fractions today is I want you to notice how some of our fractions line up perfectly with each other. So for example, 1/2. If I go straight down, that's the same as 2/4. Those are equivalent fractions, and they line up for a reason because they all are the same as half, right? They are halfway right through the rectangle. Look what else is the same as 1/2? 3/6. That's also down the middle. What else is in the middle? We have 4/8. That's also the same as 1/2. 5/10, and then 6/12. Those are all the same because they're exactly in the middle. And also notice when they are the same how, since they're halfway, 1 is half of 2, 2 is half of 4, 3 is half of 6, 4 is half of 8, 5 is half of 10, and hey, 6 is half of 12. See how that works out perfectly? Let's see some more. So there's 1/3. That's the same as 2/6 and 3/9. Those are all exactly the same because they line up perfectly with each other. They are equivalent fractions. And then we have some more, of course, like 2/3. That is the same as 4/6. And that's the same as 6/9 and 8/12. So how are those the same? Let's compare fractions and see how these fractions are the same. Because I told you that 1/3 and 2/6 right here, that they were the same. Well, how is that? See how my piece is the same size? Well, if I go to 2/6, I start coloring in 1/6. Well, that's not the same. But when I color in 2/6, notice how that is exactly the same amount as 1/3. So if I gave you 1/3 of my breadstick, that would be the same as if I cut my breadstick into 6 pieces instead of 3, but gave you 2 of those little pieces, because 2 of those little pieces in the sixths are the same as 1/3. Remember, your learning target today is I can use models to compare two fractions, and you'll know you're successful when you can see how fractions are the same, bigger, or smaller than each other.